Lucas Marshall was a man who had it all: wealth, power, and the confidence to match. As the CEO of a thriving real estate empire in New York, Lucas thrived on competition, relishing every victory that reinforced his belief in his superiority. His life revolved around extravagant parties, fast-paced business deals, and relationships that never went deeper than surface-level attraction. To him, winning wasn't just a goal, it was an identity. It was at one of these lavish parties, hosted in the penthouse of an exclusive Manhattan skyscraper, where Lucas's life would take an unexpected turn. Surrounded by high society elites and champagne flutes clinking in celebration, Lucas's closest friend, Jack Hawthorne, threw out a challenge that would change everything. Jack was the only one who dared to push Lucas's buttons, a thrill-seeker with a mischievous streak who loved to test the limits of his arrogant friend. With a smirk, Jack leaned back against the bar, swirling his drink. "You think you can win at anything, don't you?" he teased, drawing Lucas's attention away from a flirtatious socialite. Lucas raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the challenge. "Name it," he replied, his tone confident, almost daring. Jack's grin widened. "All right, how about this? I bet $1 million you wouldn't have the guts to marry a woman who doesn't fit your usual type. Someone who isn't after your money. Someone you can't charm with expensive gifts and lavish dinners." The room grew quieter as nearby guests eavesdropped, their curiosity piqued. Lucas, known for dating models and socialites, was caught off guard. His type was as predictable as it was exclusive: beautiful, glamorous, and eager to bask in the glow of his success. But Jack's challenge sparked something in him, a chance to prove, once again, that he was capable of anything. "And the terms?" Lucas asked, his smirk never faltering. "You've got to stay married for 6 months, Jack said, raising his glass. "No scandals, no loopholes, no quitting halfway. A real marriage." Lucas hesitated for only a moment. The prospect of the $1 million prize, combined with his competitive streak, outweighed any doubts. "Deal," he said, shaking Jack's hand as the crowd cheered. Jack's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Perfect. I've already got someone in mind, Chloe Richards." Lucas frowned slightly, the name unfamiliar. "Who?" Jack laughed. "You'll see soon enough." Unbeknownst to Lucas, Chloe Richards wasn't just any woman. She was someone who had no interest in wealth or status, someone who carried a strength that would challenge Lucas in ways he couldn't anticipate. For Chloe, the idea of entering a fake marriage with someone like Lucas was laughable, until she learned of the opportunity it presented. That night, the terms of the bet were set. Lucas had no idea that what began as a game would lead to the most transformative experience of his life. A few days after the party, Lucas received a file from Jack containing details about Chloe Richards. As he flipped through the documents in his sleek office overlooking Manhattan, he frowned. Chloe wasn't anything like the women he usually pursued. She wasn't a model or an heiress, but an independent woman with a background in nonprofit work. She exuded confidence, intellect, and a strong sense of purpose, qualities Lucas wasn't used to encountering. She was far from his idea of a trophy wife, and that intrigued him. "Let's see how this plays out," Lucas muttered, leaning back in his leather chair. Their first meeting was arranged at a luxurious restaurant in the heart of New York. Lucas chose the venue intentionally, thinking the setting might overwhelm her. When Chloe arrived, Lucas was taken aback. She was striking, but not in the way he expected. Her understated beauty and unshakable confidence turned heads as she walked in, and yet she seemed unfazed by the glitz and glamour of the high-end restaurant. "You must be Lucas Marshall," Chloe said directly as she sat down across from him. Her voice was steady, her gaze sharp. "And you must be Chloe Richards," Lucas replied smoothly, extending his hand. She hesitated for a split second before shaking it, her grip firm and deliberate. Chloe wasted no time getting to the point. "I know why we're here. I know about the bet, the terms, and the conditions." Lucas hid his surprise behind a measured smile. And yet you still agreed to meet me. That's curious. Why? Chloe's expression remained calm. Let's just say I have my reasons. I know what this is, a game for you. But for me, this is an opportunity. 6 months may seem short, but a lot can change in that time. Lucas leaned forward slightly, intrigued by her bluntness. And what exactly are you hoping will change? She met his gaze without flinching. I'll let you figure that out. As the dinner progressed, Chloe refused to let Lucas dominate the conversation. She deflected his charm with sharp wit and didn't hesitate to challenge his opinions. By the end of the meal, Lucas found himself both frustrated and fascinated. Chloe wasn't intimidated by him or his wealth. She was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, and he wasn't used to losing control of any situation. When the dinner ended, Chloe stood and gave him a firm nod. This won't be easy for either of us, Lucas. But I'm in on one condition. Don't think for a second that you can control me. I have my own life, and that's not going to change. Lucas watched her leave, the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor. He smirked, more intrigued than ever. This might actually be fun, he thought. As the days passed, Lucas couldn't stop thinking about Chloe. She was nothing like the women he usually pursued, and that unnerved him. For once, he felt like the one being challenged. What he didn't know was that Chloe had entered the arrangement with a plan of her own, one that would test Lucas in ways he never expected. The wedding took place in a cold, businesslike fashion. Lucas spared no expense, ensuring the event was a spectacle fit for his reputation. The venue was adorned with grand chandeliers, cascading flowers, and a guest list filled with New York's elite. But for all its splendor, the ceremony lacked warmth. To Lucas, it was merely another deal, a transaction to secure his victory in the bet. Chloe, however, approached the day with quiet composure. Dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, she carried herself with a confidence that made Lucas feel oddly off balance. As they exchanged vows, Chloe's steady gaze seemed to pierce right through him, as if she was silently reminding him that this was no ordinary union. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, there was no romantic kiss, no grand gesture, just a brief handshake for the cameras before they parted ways to mingle with the crowd. To everyone watching, it was a picture-perfect society wedding. But to the bride and groom, it was the beginning of a 6-month truce neither fully trusted. After the ceremony, Lucas escorted Chloe to his sprawling penthouse overlooking Manhattan, a testament to his wealth and status. The enormous glass windows offered a stunning view of the city, and every corner of the space was decorated with the most luxurious furnishings money could buy. Lucas watched Chloe's reaction closely, expecting awe or admiration. Instead, she surveyed the space with a neutral expression, her gaze lingering on the city skyline. Impressive, she said, her tone measured. But it's just a house. A home takes more than this. Lucas smirked, a flicker of amusement crossing his face. I'm sure you'll grow to appreciate it. Most people do. Chloe turned to him, her expression unyielding. 6 months, Lucas. Not a day more. She walked past him, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and disappeared into the guest bedroom, leaving him alone in the cavernous living room. The next few days were a battle of wills. Lucas, accustomed to having control in every aspect of his life, quickly realized that Chloe wasn't going to play by his rules. She refused the expensive gifts he sent to her room, jewelry, designer clothes, and luxury spa treatments. When he invited her to exclusive dinners with his business associates, she declined without hesitation, opting instead to keep her own routine. One morning, Lucas found Chloe sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, dressed in casual attire that seemed out of place in his meticulously curated penthouse. "You're up early," Lucas remarked, leaning against the counter with a casual confidence. "I have a meeting," she replied without looking up, flipping through a stack of papers. "A meeting? For what?" "My work," Chloe said matter-of-factly. "Not that it concerns you." Lucas chuckled, amused by her defiance. "You don't need to work anymore, you know. You're married to me now. I can provide everything you need." Chloe finally looked up, her eyes sharp. "I don't need you to provide anything for me, Lucas. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself." Her words struck a nerve, though Lucas didn't show it. He was used to women vying for his attention and wealth, but Chloe was different. She didn't seem to want anything from him, and that unnerved him more than he cared to admit. As the days turned into weeks, Lucas began to realize that the 6 months he had dismissed as a simple game were going to be anything but easy. Chloe's independence, her refusal to be impressed by his wealth, and her unshakable confidence were starting to chip away at his carefully constructed sense of control. What he didn't know was that Chloe had her own reasons for agreeing to the arrangement, reasons she wasn't ready to reveal. While Lucas viewed their marriage as a challenge to win, Chloe saw it as an opportunity to confront the man who had unknowingly caused her the deepest pain of her life. But for now, she kept her secrets to herself, watching as Lucas struggled to navigate the unfamiliar territory of dealing with someone who refused to play by his rules. The game had only just begun, and neither of them realized how much it would change them both. Lucas Marshall prided himself on being in control. Whether in business or relationships, he thrived on his ability to outmaneuver and dominate. But Chloe Richards was proving to be unlike anyone he'd ever encountered. Every time Lucas attempted to exert his influence, whether through grand gestures or subtle manipulations, Chloe countered with unwavering resolve. She refused to abandon her job, ignored his lavish gifts, and declined his invitations to high-profile events. Lucas, who had never faced resistance from anyone in his personal life, found himself frustrated and increasingly intrigued. It was during their second meeting outside of the penthouse, at Chloe's insistence, that Lucas began to see just how out of his depth he was. The cafe Chloe had chosen was a modest spot nestled in a quiet corner of Brooklyn, far removed from the high-end establishments Lucas frequented. As he walked in, the warm aroma of coffee and the hum of casual conversations greeted him. The setting felt intimate and unassuming, 2 words Lucas never associated with himself. Chloe was already seated at a small table near the window, sipping tea. She looked up as Lucas approached, her expression calm but distant. "You're late," she said, raising an eyebrow as he slid into the seat across from her. Lucas smirked, adjusting his cufflinks. "Traffic." Chloe replied, unimpressed. "I thought you'd have a helicopter for that sort of inconvenience." He chuckled, though her dry wit caught him off guard. "Sometimes it's good to slow down, change the routine." "Glad to hear you're trying," she said, taking another sip of her tea. They exchanged surface-level pleasantries, but Chloe quickly steered the conversation to the point. She placed her mug on the table and looked him directly in the eye. "Lucas, if we're going to make it through these 6 months, I want to set a few things straight," she began. "I'm not interested in your money, your penthouse, or your lifestyle. I have my own goals, and this agreement isn't going to derail them." Lucas leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "And what exactly are your goals, Chloe?" She tilted her head, her gaze steady. "Freedom, stability, integrity, things money can't buy." He studied her for a moment, trying to decipher her motivations. Most people in his life wanted something from him, access to his wealth, his influence, his power. But Chloe didn't fit that mold, and it unnerved him. "Fine," Lucas said with a shrug. 6 months. You keep your independence, and I'll keep out of your way. But tell me something, Chloe. Why agree to this at all? You clearly don't need me." Chloe hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. "Let's just say we all have our reasons, Lucas. And mine don't involve becoming another trophy on your shelf." The word stung more than Lucas expected, but he masked it with a smile. "Fair enough. But don't be surprised if I make you reconsider." Chloe smirked, her confidence unwavering. "Good luck." The meeting ended amicably, but Lucas left the cafe with more questions than answers. Chloe's refusal to be impressed or intimidated only made him more determined to figure her out. Yet, for the first time, Lucas felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, doubt. As the weeks passed, the tension between them simmered beneath the surface. Lucas made repeated attempts to win Chloe over, using every tactic in his arsenal. He planned extravagant dinners, arranged private jets for weekend getaways, and even surprised her with a custom designer wardrobe. But each effort was met with polite but firm rejection. One evening, after another failed attempt to charm her, Lucas confronted Chloe in the penthouse living room. She was seated on the couch, engrossed in a book, her demeanor as calm as ever. "Do you ever let anyone in, Chloe?" Lucas asked, his frustration evident in his tone. She closed her book slowly and looked up at him. "Do you ever stop trying to control people?" The question caught Lucas off guard. "Control? Is that what you think I'm doing?" "That's exactly what you're doing," Chloe replied, her voice firm but calm. "You're used to bending people to your will, Lucas. But here's the thing, you can't buy me, and you can't control me. So, what's left?" Her words struck a nerve, but Lucas refused to let it show. "What's left is figuring out why you're so determined to stay untouchable. Everyone has a weakness, Chloe. I'll find yours." Chloe's expression softened, almost pitying. "You think this is a game," she said quietly. "But you're the one being played, Lucas. You just don't realize it yet." With that, she stood and walked past him, leaving Lucas alone with his thoughts. Her parting words echoed in his mind, planting the first seeds of doubt. For the first time, Lucas Marshall wasn't sure he was in control. And for the first time, it scared him. The days following Chloe's pointed remark left Lucas restless. Her words, "You're the one being played," reverberated in his mind. For a man who prided himself on control, the thought of being outmaneuvered was unbearable. Yet, every time he tried to assert his authority, Chloe countered with calm defiance. Lucas shifted tactics. If grand gestures couldn't sway her, he would try to subtly disrupt her independence. He began with small manipulations, canceling her meetings without her knowledge, rescheduling events, and forgetting to pass along important messages. He hoped to frustrate her, to force her to lean on him. But Chloe saw through his moves almost instantly. One evening, she confronted him in the penthouse. "I missed an important meeting today," she said, standing in the doorway of his office. Lucas didn't look up from his laptop. "Must have been a mix-up," he replied casually. "Cut the act, Lucas." Her voice was calm but edged with steel. "I know what you're doing, and I'm not impressed." He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, finally meeting her gaze. "And what exactly am I doing?" "Trying to control me," she said bluntly. "You think if you make my life inconvenient enough, I'll fall in line. But here's the thing, Lucas, I don't need you. I've survived worse than a few canceled meetings." Lucas's smirk faltered for a moment before he regained his composure. "You're awfully confident for someone living in my penthouse, benefiting from my resources." Chloe stepped closer, her voice lowering. "And you're awfully desperate for someone who thinks they're in control." Her words hit harder than Lucas expected. Before he could respond, she turned on her heel and left the room, leaving him to stew in his frustration. The tension between them continued to build, turning their interactions into a battleground. Lucas couldn't stand how unaffected Chloe seemed by his wealth and power, while Chloe remained determined to hold her ground. One particularly heated moment came during a dinner they were forced to attend together. It was a high-profile charity gala, one of Lucas's many networking opportunities. He insisted Chloe join him, hoping to show her off as a trophy wife. But instead of blending into the crowd, Chloe made it clear she wasn't there to play along. As the evening progressed, Chloe struck up a conversation with a group of guests about nonprofit work, an area she was passionate about. Lucas watched from a distance, sipping his whiskey, his irritation growing. Chloe wasn't behaving the way he wanted. Instead of being arm candy, she was commanding attention in her own right. Later, When they were alone in the car, Lucas couldn't hold back. "Do you always have to be so difficult?" he asked, his tone sharp. Chloe didn't even flinch. "Do you always have to try so hard to control everything?" "This isn't about control," he snapped. "Isn't it?" she countered. "You wanted me to smile, nod, and play the perfect wife tonight. But that's not who I am, Lucas. And if you can't handle that, maybe you're not as strong as you think you are." Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they struck at a truth Lucas hadn't fully confronted. For all his success, he'd never been challenged like this before. Chloe wasn't just resisting him. She was forcing him to confront parts of himself he had spent years avoiding. As the car pulled up to the penthouse, they sat in silence for a moment. Lucas opened the door and stepped out, but Chloe remained in her seat. "You know," she said softly, "you're not the only one who can play games, Lucas. But the difference between us is that I know how to win without destroying people." With that, she closed the door behind her, leaving Lucas standing alone on the sidewalk. For the first time, he wondered if the bet he had so confidently accepted was starting to backfire. That night, as Lucas stared out at the city lights from his penthouse, he began to feel the cracks in his carefully constructed life. Chloe wasn't just challenging him, she was unraveling him. And deep down, he feared she might be right. For the first time in his life, Lucas wasn't sure if he would win. And the thought terrified him. Lucas Marshall was a man unraveling. For weeks, Chloe had resisted his every attempt to break her resolve. She challenged him in ways no one else ever had, refusing to bend to his wealth, his power, or his carefully crafted charm. Her quiet strength had shifted something inside him, a crack in his armor that grew wider with every confrontation. But it wasn't just her defiance that haunted Lucas. It was her words, sharp and deliberate, that echoed in his mind. "You're not the only one who can play games." She was playing a game, but he had no idea what her end goal was, and that lack of control gnawed at him. The tension between them reached its peak one rainy evening. Lucas returned to the penthouse after a grueling day of damage control at work. A major project had fallen apart, and though he couldn't prove it, he suspected Chloe's subtle influence. She was always 2 steps ahead, quietly dismantling the life he had built piece by piece. When he walked in, he found her sitting on the couch, staring out at the rain streaking across the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. She didn't acknowledge him as he entered, but Lucas could sense the shift in the air, something unspoken hanging between them. "Do you enjoy this?" Lucas asked, his voice low, barely masking his frustration. "Watching me fall apart?" Chloe didn't turn to look at him. "I'm not making you fall apart, Lucas. You're doing that all on your own." He clenched his fists, his temper flaring. "You've been sabotaging me at work, at home. Don't deny it." Finally, Chloe turned to face him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried a fire that Lucas had come to both admire and fear. "And what if I have been?" she asked, her tone even. "What are you going to do about it?" Lucas froze. He had expected her to deny it, to deflect. But her honesty stunned him. "Why, Chloe?" he demanded. "What is it you're trying to prove? What do you want from me?" She stood, her calm demeanor cracking as anger bubbled to the surface. "You really don't know, do you?" she said, her voice rising. "You destroy lives, Lucas. You ruin people without a second thought, and then you walk away like it never happened. You've spent your entire life playing a game where only you win, and everyone else loses. Did you really think I'd let you get away with it?" Lucas's breath caught in his throat. "What are you talking about?" Chloe stepped closer, her voice trembling with emotion. "Do you even remember the name Richards? Do you remember the company you crushed because it wasn't profitable enough for your empire?" Lucas blinked, confusion written across his face. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. "I've made a lot of deals, Chloe. I don't remember every one." Her laugh was bitter, filled with pain. "Of course you don't. My father, Lucas. He owned a small company, one that he poured his heart and soul into. And you destroyed it without a second thought. You took everything from him. From us. The weight of her words hit him like a freight train. He remembered now a struggling company he had acquired and dissolved years ago. It had been just another deal to him, a blip on his radar. But to Chloe, it had been everything. "Chloe," Lucas began, his voice faltering. "I didn't know." "No, you didn't," she cut him off. "Because you never cared. My father lost everything, Lucas. And when he couldn't take it anymore, he ended his life. Do you have any idea what that did to my family? To me?" Lucas was speechless. He had faced countless adversaries in his career, but none of them had ever confronted him like this. The guilt hit him like a physical blow, and for the first time, he felt the weight of the lives his ambition had destroyed. "I never wanted your money or your gifts," Chloe continued, her voice breaking. "I agreed to this marriage because I wanted you to understand what it feels like to be powerless, to have everything taken from you. I wanted you to feel the pain you've caused, even if just for a little while." Lucas staggered back, his mind racing. The woman he had married on a whim, as part of a reckless bet, was now the one person capable of bringing him to his knees. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know. I can't undo what I've done, but I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Chloe shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's not that simple, Lucas. Some things can't be fixed. But maybe, just maybe, you can start by being a better man. Not for me, but for yourself." She turned and walked away, leaving Lucas standing alone in the dimly lit room. The rain continued to pour outside, a reflection of the storm raging inside him. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. Chloe's words played over and over in his mind, forcing him to confront the man he had become. For the first time, he didn't see himself as the untouchable titan of industry. He saw himself for what he truly was, a man who had built his empire on the ruins of others. And for the first time, Lucas Marshall wasn't sure if he could live with that. Chloe's revelation left Lucas shattered. The truth of her pain, the destruction his ambition had caused, was more than he could bear. For days, he moved through life like a shadow of himself. The penthouse felt colder, emptier. Every corner of it reminded him of what he had built, and now, of what it had cost. Chloe, meanwhile, kept her distance. She still lived under the same roof, but her presence felt like a ghost haunting him. She barely spoke to Lucas, and when she did, her words were polite but distant. For Chloe, the walls she had built around her heart weren't coming down anytime soon. She had confronted Lucas, forced him to see the damage he'd caused. But forgiveness wasn't something she was ready to give, not yet. For Lucas, the guilt was unbearable. He spent nights staring at the city skyline, the empire he had built feeling more like a prison than a fortress. But amid the despair, something stirred in him, a determination he hadn't felt before. He couldn't change the past, but perhaps he could start to make amends. The next morning, Lucas called in sick to work for the first time in years. Instead of heading to his office, he sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper, making a list of every company he had crushed, every life he had impacted with his ruthless decisions. Chloe found him there, hunched over his notes, the cold coffee in his mug untouched. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice neutral but curious. Lucas looked up, the exhaustion clear in his eyes. "I'm trying to remember all of it. Every deal, every person I hurt along the way." Chloe crossed her arms, leaning against the doorway. "Why? What's the point?" "Because I need to make it right," Lucas said quietly. "Not just for you but for them. And for me." For a moment, Chloe said nothing. Then she walked away, without another word, leaving Lucas to his self-imposed mission. Over the next few weeks, Lucas began taking steps to undo the damage he had caused. He reached out to the families of former employees whose livelihoods he had destroyed, offering financial compensation and, where possible, opportunities to rebuild. He quietly funneled funds into small businesses and nonprofits, using his vast resources to support the very people he had once disregarded. But Lucas knew that money alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to confront the human cost of his actions. One day, he made the drive to a small town hours outside the city, the place where Chloe's father had once run his modest business. It was a far cry from the skyscrapers and luxury of Manhattan. The old factory her father had owned was long abandoned, its walls weathered and crumbling. Lucas stood outside for a long time, the memories of his ruthless decision-making hitting him like a tidal wave. He placed his hands in his pockets, staring at the broken building as if it were a reflection of himself. "I'm sorry," he whispered to no one in particular, his voice trembling with sincerity. "I'm sorry for what I did to you, your family, and everyone else who was hurt because of me." When Lucas returned to the penthouse that evening, Chloe was sitting on the balcony with a book in her lap. She didn't look up as he approached, but she spoke. "You've been gone all day," she said simply. "I went to your hometown," Lucas replied, pulling out a chair beside her. That caught her attention. She put the book down, her brow furrowed. "Why?" "To see what I destroyed," he said, his voice steady. "To understand what it must have felt like for you, and to figure out how to start making it right." Chloe studied him, her expression unreadable. "And what did you find?" Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Pain, regret, guilt. But I also found clarity. I can't undo what I did, Chloe. I can't bring your father back or fix the years you and your mother spent struggling. But I can try to be better from here on out." For the first time in weeks, Chloe softened. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or hope. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" she asked. "I am," Lucas said firmly. "Not for a bet, not to win, but because I want to be a man who deserves a second chance." Chloe nodded slowly, her expression guarded but contemplative. "We'll see, Lucas. Actions speak louder than words." Lucas didn't push her for more. He knew the road ahead would be long, but for the first time, he felt like he was walking in the right direction. That night, as Lucas lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, he thought of Chloe's words, "Actions speak louder than words." If he wanted to win her forgiveness, her trust, he would need to show her that he was truly changing. Not through promises, but through the man he was becoming. And for the first time in his life, Lucas wasn't focused on winning. He was focused on redemption. The weeks following Lucas's journey of redemption were filled with subtle, yet profound changes. For the first time, he began to slow down to pay attention to the people and the world around him. Chloe noticed the shift, though she remained cautious. She saw him cancel high-profile meetings to make time for rebuilding the lives he had affected. She saw him writing personal letters to families he had wronged, his once pristine penthouse desk now cluttered with notes and envelopes. At home, Lucas became less the commanding figure and more the quiet presence. He no longer tried to win Chloe over with grand gestures or control her through manipulation. Instead, he respected her space, letting his actions speak for themselves. Slowly, the air between them began to thaw. One rainy evening, Chloe sat on the couch with a mug of tea, flipping through a book. Lucas entered the room with an envelope in hand, his expression hesitant. "Chloe," he began softly, holding the envelope out to her. "This is for you." She looked at him, then at the envelope. "What is it?" "An official deed," Lucas said, his voice steady but vulnerable. "I repurchased your father's company. The building, the name, everything. It's yours now." Chloe's hands froze mid-air as she stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "You bought it back?" Lucas nodded. "I thought it might be a way to honor your father's memory, to give you the choice to rebuild it or do something new with it. Whatever you decide, it's yours." For a long moment, Chloe didn't speak. She opened the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled out the documents. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back, unwilling to let herself be overwhelmed. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I needed to do something that wasn't about me," Lucas said. "This isn't about trying to earn your forgiveness or prove a point. It's about trying to make things right in any way I can. Chloe stared at him, her walls beginning to crack. For the first time, she saw not the arrogant man who had destroyed her family's livelihood, but someone who was truly trying to change. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. Lucas smiled faintly, relieved but cautious. "You don't need to thank me. I just hope it's a step forward." The following weeks brought small but significant changes in their dynamic. Chloe began to let Lucas into her world, bit by bit. She invited him to join her on long walks through Central Park, where they talked about life outside of their complicated arrangement. She allowed him to accompany her to her nonprofit meetings, where she watched with quiet pride as he listened intently and even offered his own resources to help fund their initiatives. One night, as they sat on the balcony overlooking the glowing city skyline, Chloe finally let her guard down. "You've surprised me," she admitted, her voice soft. Lucas turned to her, his expression earnest. "How so?" "I didn't think you'd actually change," Chloe said, her gaze distant. "When this started, I thought you'd play the same game you always play. But you've proven me wrong." Lucas leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I had to prove it to myself first, Chloe. I didn't like the man I was. Meeting you had forced me to see that." She smiled faintly, her fingers trailing along the edge of her chair. "It's not easy to forgive, Lucas. What you did to my family, to me, it left scars." "I know," he said quietly, "and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, or at all. But I promise you this, I'll never stop trying to be better. For you, for myself, for all the people I've hurt." Chloe turned to look at him, and for the first time there was something more in her eyes. Not just guarded respect, but the faint flicker of trust. As the 6-month agreement came to an end, Lucas prepared for the inevitable conversation. He had fallen for Chloe in a way he hadn't thought possible, but he knew he couldn't force her to stay. On their final night as husband and wife, Lucas cooked dinner, a simple, homemade meal. The atmosphere was warm, quiet, and charged with unspoken emotion. After dinner, Lucas cleared his throat, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "Chloe, I know our agreement is over tomorrow, and if you want to leave, I'll understand. But I need you to know that I don't want this to end." Chloe stared at him, her expression unreadable. "I've fallen in love with you," Lucas continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Not as part of some bet, but because you've shown me what it means to be strong, to be resilient. You've made me want to be a better man. And I want to build something real with you. If you'll let me." For a moment, Chloe said nothing. Then, slowly, a smile broke across her face, a real, genuine smile. "I've fallen for you too, Lucas," she admitted, her voice soft. "But if we do this, it's on one condition." "Anything," he said, his heart pounding. "No bets. No games. No control," Chloe said firmly. "We do this as equals. As partners." Lucas nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "I wouldn't want it any other way." That night, for the first time, Lucas and Chloe shared not just a marriage of circumstance, but one of mutual trust, respect, and love. Their story had begun as a game, but it ended as something real, something worth fighting for. And as they stood together on the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle below, they both knew they were ready to write the next chapter of their lives, together.